Hopefully by the end of this, and please be interactive if you want to ask questions, throw up a hand. By the end of this, hopefully we'll be able to give you a little bit of information to go back to your organizations. And if you're looking at a cloud solution, be able to ask the right questions, get rid of some of the FUD that's out there, and talk to your enterprise, your executive team, your board of directors about what you need to get a good cloud solution. So the question is, why all the misunderstanding? Cloud inherently, and David Smith, I think, had a great quote here. He said, it's all about the capabilities delivered as a service with a clear boundary between the provider and the customer. And that makes it very, very open to the myths. Think about the airplane industry. I mean, if you're going to build an airplane, you're going to be very concerned with the parts that go into the engine. You're going to be very concerned with how that's maintained on a day-to-day basis, the operations of it, how it flies. Right? As a consumer in the airline industry, you really don't care about that. You care about getting from point A to point B with free drinks and some Wi-Fi. Right? That's really what we want. We need, Wi-Fi has to work or that really sucks. The reality is you're going to do some due diligence, of course, right? You're going to read the papers. You're going to look into whether United is flying on time, whether American Airlines has had an accident, and you're going to go to a different provider if you're not satisfied with what you're seeing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're concerned with point A to point B. That's your SLA. So let's talk about some of the myths. The first myth, and I love this one. So full disclosure on who I am. I'm a strategist in the office of the CISO at Zscaler. We are a cloud play, pure cloud, built for the cloud, multi-tenant security provider. Okay? When I go to corporations and I talk to them and I hear, we don't really use the cloud. Everybody uses the cloud some way. Marketing, anybody in here from marketing? Good. Marketing is responsible for this. We have slapped the word cloud on absolutely everything. We have private cloud, public cloud, hybrid cloud. You can have an on-prem cloud. Not sure how that one works, and if anybody knows, please let me know, because it's ridiculous. The reality is shadow IT, another marketing term, this is what I call simply a well-informed employee. That's what shadow IT is. If you've got HTTP or HTTPS open to the internet and they have a credit card, you've got cloud services running somewhere in your environment. And what we need to look at is, why are they doing that? Because employees don't come to the office every day going, I'm going to violate policy and get fired today. What they're trying to do is they're trying to do something better for themselves or their team or the company, right? They're trying to find a way to maybe work on the train while they commute. So they want to throw stuff up into Box or Dropbox. You might have an engineer who's checking code into GitHub so he can get home, check it out, and work on it at home, right? It's not malicious intent. The majority of this is not malicious intent. It is simple desire to operate under what we have today. And the employees that come in today are coming in fully versed in Facebook, Google, all the cloud apps that are out there, and they actually have a better scope of tools as they come into our organizations than we have in the enterprise. We are slow about it. So as a CISO, you want to be able to get away from saying no, right? You don't want to be the yes-no department. You need to be the yes and here's how, and be able to manage and monitor. So it's actually really interesting following the last gentleman who was talking about privacy and very specifically around monitoring, because we don't want to use the term surveillance. It is, but you want to understand what is happening on your network. You want to be able to go out to a cloud provider, choose one, whether it's Dropbox or Box, you pick between the two of them, you decide what works, you buy in bulk for your corporation, you put an SLA in place, and then you have an acceptable use of a cloud solution, and it's not your data scattered everywhere across a whole bunch of different solutions. The key is to understand what is happening in your network. Myth number 2, I lose control of my data when it goes to the cloud, relates directly to myth number 1. You lose control of your data when your employees are using the cloud and you don't know about it. The location or the platform that you put your data on should not affect your control. If it does, if you have a cloud provider that affects your control, leave that cloud provider. Find one that does it properly. There should be no reason that the fact that data has gone to a different place. We did this through the 80s and 90s with IBM, EDS, and all the others. We outsourced our IT departments. Data went out. It's the same stuff. Take the word cloud out of it and it suddenly makes a lot more sense. You want to make sure that you have data portability. Data portability is critical. You need to make sure that you can get your data back out, because we live and die, as cloud vendors, we live and die by our service, right? So you should have the ability to pull your data out and go somewhere else, or pull your data out and use it somewhere else. Maybe you want to put it into Splunk, you want to put it into a SIM, you want to put it into some big analytics project that you have, but it's your data. You need to retain control of it, and that comes as you develop your relationship with your cloud provider and as you do your due diligence throughout it. Number 3, cloud is less secure than on-premise. So if anybody, was anybody here for the last talk? Couple? Okay, so we mentioned a couple of these, he mentioned a couple of these in here. Every one of these logos up here has suffered a reasonably major breach in the last 24 months. And every one of those breaches was on-prem. The reality is, cloud providers, again, are operating based on their reputation and what they do for the application that they deliver. So if you're talking RAM scraping malware that hit Target or Michael's, whether it was stolen admin credentials that were used in, who was it, JP Morgan and OPM, or even now what we're seeing more so, trusted third parties. Right? The trusted third parties, the IBMs, the Accentures are out there as trusted third parties, but also in the case of Target, it was Fazio Mechanicals. They were an HVAC vendor, but that's how they got in. They got in through a trusted third party. They had access, they compromised Fazio, and the the reason that they would target something like a Fazio is because when you target Fazio, now you have all their customers. You don't just have one. Same with OPM. OPM, it was Keypoint. Background checking company. They were part of the process for doing the background checks. Just found out, I think it was last month, that not only did they get all the PII, all the background, they got 5.5 million sets of fingerprints. I mean, mind-blowingly insane how deep they got into that, right? But that's because any one of these is not a security provider, right? Target is a retailer. P.F. Chang's is a restaurant. They are not going to invest in the security programs that a cloud provider has to, right? We have to, the whole reason we did cloud is it's cheaper. Anybody disagree with that one? It's economies of scale, right? So a cloud provider is going to invest, should invest. That's not to say they're not going to. And if they don't, that's where the due diligence has to come. That's where you, as a consumer, have to ask those questions. So you want to see what their security programs are, where are they investing it, and what makes it more secure. At the end of the day, it needs to be as secure as your environment or better. That's what you want to aim for when you're talking to them. So number 4, I'm at the mercy of the cloud vendors for patching. Yes, you are. But is it mercy? Or is it just their responsibility? I mean, how many here had to go through some sort of effort for Heartbleed when it came out? Right? How many people were scrambling, trying to find the patch, test, right? That's what you have to do. You've still got to wait until a vendor comes out and builds a patch and submits it, sends it to you. Then you've got to take it, bring it in, test it, roll it out, do all the things. Or your vendor has to, right? This is laborious work. It's time-consuming, and it's costly. And that's what a cloud vendor does, because that is their business. It had better be their business, right? NIST, back in 2014, made the standard all SSL certificates were going to be 2,048-bit SSL certs, right? That implemented a 4 times load on networks. That implemented extra load on decryption equipment, on the web gateways. If you're running your own stuff, that's all stuff that you, A, probably didn't plan for, B, had to account for and pay for, right? And then had to implement. Or your SLA stated 5 nines with a cloud provider and it's his problem, which it should be. And that's where you're going to look at the benefits. So yeah, absolutely. Are you at the mercy of the cloud vendors? Yes. It is their problem. It is their issue. They need to deal with it. You need a good contract. Make sure your contract stipulates SLAs, right? And that this type of thing doesn't affect you. Appliances provide greater control over scalability and performance. No. the cloud is elastic, right? That's one of the benefits. So that whole concept of multi-tenancy, we squeeze everything out of every CPU, every network device, every piece of hardware that we can, because that's how we make money, right? We get the most out of it, and then that way we've got a greater profit margin. When you scale on-prem, the difference that you're going to have to deal with is you're going to have to deal with the purchase, and you're going to have to deal with planning for peak usage, right? Not consumption. If you've got an organization with 10,000 people in it, and you go to a cloud provider, you will buy 10,000 licenses, right? And an SLA that goes with it. If you're building your own infrastructure for that, you're going to have to plan for the peak capacity of 10,000 users. Take an HR system, performance reviews. 9,872 of them are going to do it on Friday before it's due. I mean, that's what we always do, right? It's always at the end. Or it's a retailer that has a peak Christmas. Either way, you're going to have to plan for that. The rest of the year, or the rest of the week, or the rest of the month, that stuff is running at 40%, 50%, 60%, whatever it is. It's not running at the peak. It's running at a much lower consumption. And then perhaps you decide you're going to do an acquisition. So you're 10,000 users. You're going to buy a company, acquire them. They've got 2,200 more. Well, how do you buy more capacity? You buy it in the chunks that they sell it in. So do they sell it in 10,000 user chunks, or do they sell it, the appliances are scaled for X type of performance, and you're having to buy it in that. And then if you want HA, you're buying multiples, and if it's in multiple locations, you're buying redundancy. And now you're actually looking at, well, do I have to re-architect? Do I need SSL decryption? Do I have to reroute? And it's all the pieces. So does it give you greater control over scalability and performance? No. It gives you greater responsibility over planning capacity, right? You need to make sure, again, when you're dealing with your cloud provider, that they have the ability to scale. You need to ask them. You need to validate, can they go through it? Don't run a load test on a cloud provider. It's pointless. What you want to do is you want to talk to one of their customers that's your size or bigger and say, what was it like when you onboarded? What was the first week like? What was the first 30 days like? And what were the first 6 months like? That way you can find out, how did they bring them on? Did they bring them on with very little and try to jam them in and build as they go? Or did they actually have the capacity as they brought them on, and it was an easy, smooth onboarding? These are making sense, Darren? Anybody? You're so quiet. I love it. I prefer interactive, but hey. Cloud security is more difficult to manage. Again, this comes from people that don't use cloud. Right? I would argue it's actually the exact opposite, truthfully. When you have to manage devices, you're going to manage multiple devices, typically in multiple locations, being managed by multiple people. You're going to have to take that data, somehow pull it back. So let's go in the security realm. That's where I'm sitting. So you've got a bunch of devices that are out there. You're going to pull them back with, you've got a SIM, you've got, again, Splunk, something where you want to make sense of it, you want to correlate it against something else. That's your responsibility to pull all those back and to make sure that all of your configurations are getting pushed out correctly. Again, data portability comes in here. So this is coming back to one of the earlier myths, in that you need to make sure that this does not become a silo, right? You want to make sure that as you work with your cloud provider, and again, let's talk security, that you can get the data out of them, bring it back. Maybe you want to correlate it against local firewall logs. Maybe you have an on-prem SIM. Maybe you have a different vendor that's handling something for you. But the data needs to be yours, and you need to have portability with it. Plus, if the vendor doesn't do a good job, you walk away. That's the idea. That's the control that you have, is that you're only at the behest of that contract. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe. Not a 5 or 8 year investment into a hardware and an infrastructure that in this day and age, if you're planning anything that's 8 years out, I mean, where's it going to be? We don't know what's going to happen next week, let alone next year, right? So you want to make sure that you have that type of capability. Adding new capabilities as well. So if you decide that you're managing your security, and contrary to what the previous guy said, you're going to do some surveillance and you're going to crack SSL, right? I do advocate, and sort of on a side note, the privacy aspect is very important. We should not take anything in the security realm, especially when it comes to decryption, lightly. Whether it's iPhones or SSL decryption, it needs to be done in a planned and thoughtful manner. Having said that, it needs to be done. That's the issue right now. From a corporate perspective, we on the security side see well over 50% of all advanced persistent threats now coming through SSL. Bad guys figured it out. Encrypt it. We don't look at encrypted traffic. It gets through. Right? It's a very simple way in. And you know, take a look at the hospital in DC that just shut down on Monday. Right? That's a form of locky. They're using proprietary encryption. It's a rather interesting little exploit that they've got going there. But they're using proprietary encryption to get in and out of the network. So back to this. If you want to add a module, you want to add capability, you want to add SSL decryption, in the on-prem world, that's more boxes, more management. With your vendor, it should be a configuration change. That's what it should be. If you want to add sandboxing, again, if you're going to try and go up against something like Locky, that thing mutates every day, every exploit. We've seen 75 different versions of it in the last month alone that we've blocked against. Right? And that's what's happening. The only way you find that is through a sandbox. You have to detonate it, you have to run it, you got to see what it does, and make sure you get it. You're not going to get it on a signature base. Best you could do there is maybe let them infect it, and when it calls out to command and control and tries to get the keys, that you block it there. But that's still a cleanup that you have to do, and that's a risky way to do it. But that should be a configuration change. That should not be a re-architecture, more boxes, HA, adding more, etc. Oops. Cloud resources are more exposed to attack. The days of, I own the network, I own the application, I'm going to lock it down, I'm going to control who's on it, going to make sure they have to be on the LAN using two-factor, it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't. Unless you are, you know, DoD and you're pushing everything through 100% VPN with no BYOD, this becomes a problem, trying to lock it down. Your employees are going to want access, right? Myth number one, right? That we don't use cloud services. They're going to want access. So you're going to open up web services. You're going to open up a web application, expose the data that way. You're going to create a VPN. That's typically what we see. And your employees are going to complain because if you're backhauling everything back to corporate, all traffic off that VPN, the experience is slow. They want to browse Facebook while they're doing their HR report, whatever it is, and then you end up split tunneling, right? We see a majority of users that build VPNs split tunnel. Now you've got a backdoor into the environment and a nice pipe out to the internet, right? So the reality with cloud vendors is we have one methodology that we are going to open up to our customers, and that's going to be how you get in and out. We're going to protect that in as best a way as we can, right? And again, you're going back and you're looking at what does this cloud vendor do, what are their capabilities, and you're going to ask those questions. But they, I can guarantee you, will be investing a lot more in the security program that they have in place to protect that application that they're selling to you than you will be in your security program that you're using to protect, perhaps you make hammers. Right? So it is the business that we're in. Plus, when you look at things like DDoS and scalability, we are typically better built to withstand that type of thing. Myth number 8. Oh, we are motoring through this. This is good. Multi-tenant clouds expose privacy concerns. Big topic. There are a lot of myths under the privacy side of things, and if you ever want to talk about it, I'll be happy to. I was the cloud privacy officer for the cloud division of SAP for several years. There's a lot of myths in the privacy realm. The reality is, if you're going to attack and look for data, if you're going to try and get after data, in a multi-tenant environment, hypervisor would probably be the most apropos way to attack it. There's a couple others, we'll talk about those in a second. But I have not seen one that's been successful, and I can't think of one today. So if anybody knows of a good hypervisor attack on a cloud provider, please let me know, because I would love to include it. The reality is, on this side, if you're going to go after data that's in a cloud provider, it is going to be a much more pedestrian attack. Right? You're not going to try and attack the cloud provider and jump from one customer to another. You're going to go after, spear phishing the administrator of that cloud provider, right? So You as a customer, you've bought services, you've assigned an administrator, we're going to figure out who the administrator is, go after that administrator, now I've got access to your cloud environment. And I will do that customer to customer to customer, right? If I wanted to go after the cloud provider themselves, I'm going to go after their administrators, right? Look for the back-end management. And this is a subject that I cannot stress enough. In the years that I was working and selling HR systems in Germany from an American company that they said would never be done because of the data privacy issues, very few of the customers ever asked me about the back-end administration systems, right? The management. Now, this is something that you need, this is a discussion that you have to have with your cloud provider or anybody who's selling you cloud services. You need the transparency into what is it that they do, how do they do it, what access do their operations personnel have, how do they vet their operations personnel, right? Because again, go back to insider threat, you now have to be a little bit concerned with that insider threat. So you want to make sure that you want to make sure that that threat is dealt with before it becomes an issue. So in the back end, you want to look at what's the certification that happens, right? ISO, SOC 2, what's happening back there, and how does that translate? Now, regulations can kill a deal, absolutely. Understand your regulations. As was mentioned earlier as well, the US has no privacy regulations. We have a lot of different things that are based on industry. We have HIPAA, we have GLBA, we have PCI, we have all these different industry level regulations. We have some state level stuff, Massachusetts, but we do not have that sweeping control or law that, well, in the case of Europe, there's a directive and each country puts in their own law, but we don't have that yet. I've got a different opinion of the last speaker in that I hope that we get something, but I hope it is not to the extent that the Europeans have put in, because if you ever try to do business in Europe, it is very, very difficult because everything is PII and there is a massive wealth of control that has to be put around it. So know what your regulations are, know what industry you're in, understand what they are, but there should not be a cloud vendor that can't address the issues. Now, if you have health data and they are not on board with HIPAA, walk away. Go to another vendor that is on board with HIPAA. I do caution, compliance does not equal security, right? Because we are now looking at the hospitals are getting murdered with Locky and crypto, and they are all compliant. They all have the checkboxes. Target had PCI, and they got hit on the credit card side. So compliance does not equal security. In fact, I would say remember that checkbox vulnerability is probably the worst thing that you could deal with, right? Where you've got all those boxes checked, and they walk in and you don't know about it. Number 9, transparency. Again, this is incredibly important. Location does not denote security, nor does it denote transparency. If you buy a box from any of the vendors, rack it, plug it in, you have no more transparency into that box than you have with a cloud provider, right? You've got an administrative login there, or you've got an administrative login with the cloud. You don't know how the code was built. You don't know what the box does. The only difference is it's a comfort, it's an emotional discussion where I can look at the box. I can see the box, and I know no one's touched that box. Physical environmental controls around a cloud provider should be part of your discussion. That way you do know who's touched the box, who comes in and handles the box, who has access to the box. But beyond that, it's just a box. You don't know what's going on in there. How many people here have a company that uses Salesforce? See, I always expect more. Salesforce just seems so predominant, but there's a decent amount. They have, are you guys aware that they have trust.salesforce.com? Yep. That's where they will show you everything about their cloud. Zscaler will do the same thing. Trust.zscaler.com. Go to it, it's public, and go have a look at it. The need for transparency is what builds the trust. We will tell you if we're down. If for some reason today, the Columbus node bottoms out and tanks and we reroute traffic, which we should, and that's part of our SLA because it's 5 nines, we reroute it to the Cleveland node and you never even noticed, Would we tell you about it? Yes. Your cloud vendor should tell you about it. You shouldn't hear from another customer. You shouldn't hear from a conversation where you've got an administrator on the phone with a TAM, and the TAM says something about last week's outage, and you went, what? No, that conversation should never happen. You should be able to go look at it, find the X, find the red box, because the reality in this world is this shit breaks all the time, right? This is going to break. There isn't a cloud provider out there that's going to say nothing's going to break. Right? They may say you won't notice it when it breaks, but it will all break. It's an imperfect world. Hardware failures, software failures, bad code, rush job on something, it's going to happen. So again, this is going back to the SOX audits or the ISO certification. When you get into dealing with transparency and understanding what happens, you need to take those audits and do not take them the day before the contract's being signed where they chuck it over the fence and say, here, they've got the audit, and you say, okay. That audit is the baseline for what you have to do around security. That's the starting point. It should not be the end point. You need to take that, and you need to take that contract, and you need to take the audit, and you need to put the two together and say, what lines up? Okay? And it's the how, not the how, it's the what, it's the end state. There's no point in going to a cloud provider and saying, I want you to do this security thing this way, right? That's not going to work. Cloud providers are multi-tenant. They have thousands, tens of thousands of customers. They're going to do their stuff one way and one way only. If they do it multiple ways, that is a recipe for disaster. It will break. They will screw up, customer A's procedure with customer B's. Their operations has to happen one way, and that way has to be audited. Right? So you take that audit, that's your starting point. You compare the two, you line it up, and maybe it hits 80% of what you need. Now you have a conversation for the last 20% that goes in the contract. And always discuss the what you're trying to achieve. What is your goal? What is it that you do that you're trying to achieve that they don't have? Don't worry about the how. You can discuss the how later. You can give them recommendations. Does it matter if it's 7 characters or 12 characters on a password? Does it matter if it's changed 3 times a week or 9 times a week? I can't tell you the number of discussions or arguments I've had where they've said, no, it has to be 8 characters. And I have to say, no, it's 6, but it changes every 30 seconds because it's a one-time password. And I'm using RSA tokens. And customers will not accept that because, no, it's got to be 8 characters. Right? So it's not the how. It's what are you trying to achieve. Again, you want to make sure that at the end of it, what you have bought is equal to or better than what you would put in yourself. Right? That's really what you're aiming for. Oh, and the last point, not all clouds are created equal. If you have, just because you're dealing with a well-known name in the software industry, do not assume the cloud is great, perfect, or anything. The same conversation has to happen. If they're a startup, mid-size, or one of the behemoths, and I would venture that there are actually certain ones that you want to have the conversation more with, but have the conversation. Don't take it at face value just because there's a reputation and a name. And finally, appliances are more reliable than cloud. No. Most companies are not in the business of IT. Right? Most companies have a purpose, a business that they're in, and IT supports that business. So if they're not in the business of IT, they're not going to have a very deep budget. Their IT department is going to be a cost center. They're going to fight for every single dollar that they invest, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have to have those conversations where you fight for every dollar at budget time, and then in February when they claw back 10%, you're fighting to get it down to at least 8, maybe 6, because you're trying to get the programs in that you want. Right? The cloud vendors, security is their business, right? Yes, they will build an HR system. Yes, they will build a finance system, but we live and die by our reputations. And if somebody's down for 15 minutes, that's news. If somebody's breached, the trust is gone. I mean, would you stay with a customer, with a vendor that's breached? Would you at least go back and have a right to audit? So the reality is, when you deal with the IT groups, how many guys in here have ever gotten an SLA from their IT group when they built an app for them? I got 2. Good. And a half. I saw sort of, yeah, kind of it was, yeah. It'll be up during the week. What's that? It was a begrudging, yeah, you got to fight for it, right? When you go to a cloud vendor, they should be handing you an SLA. What's the best SLA you've ever seen on hardware? 4 hours, new hardware. It's usually about the best one I've ever seen. All right, so that means whatever app you built internally, if it doesn't have 2, and by the way, if that's hot, cold, right, whether it's built for capacity, you have to build it so that you can lose at least 1 full machine for 4 hours, plus recovery, plus unpackaging, plus getting the guy to drive in and pick it up. Right? All of that has to be built into it. The cloud providers should be, and again, these are should-bes. These are not absolutes. This is not a sweeping recommendation that everything belongs in the cloud, because everything doesn't belong in the cloud. And this is not a sweeping recommendation that every cloud vendor is better than on-prem. There are certain things that customers will do on-prem, and this is where you make your decisions. This is where you look at application A, and application B, and application C, and say, look, C is never going outside because that's how we price, our gas. I don't know, it's the fuel mixture at Exxon, whatever. That's never going outside. But we can take these other 2, send them to the cloud, save some money there, and take that money and now refocus it on the security around that one. It gives you that ability. So that's what you want to make sure, that you're in there and building that relationship, and that you do have those SLAs in place. Plus, you also want to make sure that your contracts have things like the right to audit. This used to drive everybody I worked with at SAP nuts when I would put this out there. But the reality is, when I asked you for HR data and I was going to put it in my system, you need the right to audit. By European law, it has to be there. So we were throwing it up there up front. And you have to have that. That's what builds that trust, because you may not execute it, and you may not be able to fully control the audit the way you want to. You may not get to come in and put your hands on the box and run some scripts and commands on it, which you shouldn't be because it's a multi-tenant environment. But you do have the right to audit, to look at certain things, and to have certain evidence presented to you to prove what it is that they have come up with. So, not bad. We've got a couple minutes. I will leave it open to questions if there are any. Happy to talk about it. And by the way, again, free disclosure, Zscaler is a cloud vendor for security. If you want to run a security test on your environment, it is non-invasive. securitypreview.zscaler.com. Yes, in the back.
Bill, there's obviously some different skills that are needed to be able to protect the cloud environment. What do you suggest as security professionals we do to prepare for your sorts of cloud?
So for those that may not have heard it, the idea that there's different skills required to protect a cloud environment versus on-prem, and what should you do? I don't know if there's substantially a different skill set. I think the understanding of security professionals around the bodies of knowledge that we've learned of how to protect data applies. Right? So you do need to have, I would recommend that whoever's dealing with your security planning, so if you've got an enterprise where your business unit's going to come to you and ask for a system, or they bring you a system like a cloud, hey, we want to use this cloud one, that you have somebody that can do a basic sweep of what it is that the data is. So you've got your data classification being done, the controls that need to be put against it, and then you want to start looking at how to assess the vendor. So assessment would be a good one. I would recommend sitting with your legal team. I spent years, again, I am not a lawyer either, but I spent years with the legal team. I read a contract probably as well as a lawyer, and I can write a security contract probably better than a lawyer. Because you want to take the intimate knowledge you have on security and data classification and be able to apply the legal understanding of how it's written. I hate the word immediate. You can't have the word immediate in a contract. Drives me nuts. But that I would start with that. Assessment, sort of an audit, if you will. I'm a big advocate of Scrum teams, right? So if you can build a security team that has an auditor on it, a documentation specialist, maybe a SecOps guy, somebody that understands law, legal clerk, that type of thing, you've got a really good team starting to understand how to implement these solutions. Anything else? No, guys, then thank you. I believe the slides will be available. If they're not, you can grab me directly. I'll get you a copy of them. If anything, I hope this makes it easier for you to have a conversation internally and with your cloud vendors. There are cloud vendors that will hate me for this kind of thing, but hey, that's what we got to do. This keeps us honest. Ask the questions, and I'm willing, if you want, hit me up afterwards on email or something if you want to talk more about it. Thank you.